I'll let you decide which you believe is the before and after footage in this video, but I will say this, that something certainly appears different when you pass beneath Bridge 18W and head towards the Lion Keys on the Llangollen Canal these days. And I'll also just add this extra thing in that to me it's not just about the trees, it's about the houses and the ever-changing nature of the landscape. And I'm not going to start kicking off or saying I approve or disapprove or anything at all like that. I'm instead going to say this. I'm starting to feel old, my friends. I'm starting to have lots of memories of different sections of Canal that are completely different in nature to what they are now. Just for the record, these stumps you're seeing now are all that remains of the trees on the right hand side of the boat. But I've got that feeling of nostalgia for a lot of places now that I know the nature of the canal and the nature of the area, not even just the canal, of course, has completely changed and will never be what it once was. And when I think about some of my old places, I used to like to take my telescope in the evenings and look in the dark sky on the outskirts of a town or village. And now I think, flipping heck, I'd be in somebody's living room putting a telescope against their TV screen if I tried that these days. It's incredible when you think about the bigger picture around the UK that even in my lifetime I can see the towns and villages that I've grown up and boated around and see the extraordinary differences and how much bigger so many of them have become. And yet you almost don't realise it as it's happening. And this is something that I'm sure many people all across the nation have got their own examples of. When I think about my hometown, Oswestry, which is only a small place in the grand scheme of things, yet it's so much more massive than it was when I was growing up. And there's entire sections of town and street names that people will mention to me now, and I haven't got a concept of where on earth they are talking about, and yet I lived most of my life in this place. And this is something that I love to talk to my nan and granddad about because they, of course, grew up with a much smaller version of Oswestry, and places such as where I went to school and lived might have been named after the very farms and fields and features that were there when my nan and granddad were growing up, which of course were then redeveloped into schools and houses and amenities in that strange way, almost perversely, then taking on the names of the natural features that once stood there. And then, of course, if I speak to my parents, they have a different vision of what Oswestry is when they grew up and what they grew to know the town as. And then again, my generation as an even bigger town as a base level, and the generation coming up now will one day hear me talking about things like how green the canals used to be, maybe, and think, flipping heck, the canal, that stream that runs through all those housing developments. Well, let's hope it's not quite that extreme. So yeah, I thought I would just use this video as an excuse to have a bit of a nostalgic ramble, because some of you may know I am an absolute certified nostalgia addict, and I'm so glad that I've got so many of these old boat trips and sections of canal recorded from the sort of boater's POV, just for my own amusement and nostalgia, but just because it's quite interesting archive footage to have now. And I'm sure I've got this very section of canal recorded from my first boat as well, going back to about a decade or so ago. But I thought, at the very least, if you're going to have to listen to me talking absolute rubbish, I would give you the HD version of the footage. So it's quite interesting as well that when I bought my first boat way back in 2012, there were what I'd consider the old guard of boating back then, who in an era before the internet had really sort of become all-consuming and weaved its way throughout everything, had a lot of almost generational passed down advice and tips and experience rather than being able to look up everything online. And a lot of them, I say a lot, maybe 4 people said it in my initial months of moving on and getting used to boat life, that I was seeing the canals at their best. And I don't know, there's something There's something I just want to bookmark about that, and maybe come back in another 5 years and see what the canals are like, how the setup is like to live on a boat, and whether it's easier or more difficult. It's something that I've thought a lot about, especially in recent times. I'm considering what to get for my third boat, whether I want to just get a smaller boat like my first one, so I'm not putting too much money into something that's bound to the canals and the positives and negatives of how the canals are operated and managed. And then I flip flop really at the moment, whether I want a smaller boat with minimal risk and minimal connection to the canal, or whether I want a big fancy boat that I move my other half on and we go all in into boat life and live it up for a few years and see how things progress. But I do often think I'd love to go back and speak to some of those people who told me a decade ago that I was seeing the best of the canals at that point, because there's a concept we all know about. It's easy to criticize, it's easy to see the negatives in things, but I would say if you ignore the negatives, I'm feeling towards a lot of things to do with the canals and boat life, especially, like I say, as I consider purchasing another boat, which don't come cheap these days. Rather than being easy to see the negatives, I feel like it might be at the moment a bit more difficult to see the positives. It's more difficult to find positive movements and positive direction in life afloat. And remember, I've been on and off boats over the last 12 years, so I'm not saying this as somebody with zero experience. I'm saying this with my own personal experience, which might not be as extensive or wide-ranging as other people's, but it's still now over a decade of boating-related interest and experience. Who knows though, perhaps I'm just trying to find a way to convince my girlfriend not to make me spend a fortune on another boat. I know I can say that at this point in the video because there's no way she would have watched this long when she has to deal with me and listen to me in real life. So, on a serious note to end though, I know I am tremendously lucky to have lived on boats over this era where so much restoration work and maintenance was done by people who came before us, obviously long after the industrial age of the canals. And I think more and more that I've got in just before what could become an unbelievably busy holiday industry period for the canals. Whether it will keep developing and marinas and hire boat fleets will expand and continue in the way that I've got a feeling that they're going to, time will tell ultimately. And all that we can do is make the most of whatever situations we find ourselves in, and if possible, guide them in a direction that will hopefully be best suited for all. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. I've whittled on way longer than I expected to in this video, and I've actually doubled the amount of boating I was planning on doing. And as always, I suppose we'll wrap things up and say thank you so much for tuning in. Keep it interesting, keep it boat-worthy, have a fantastic day, and of course, my friends, farewell. Also, check out my boat life books and all the links in the description. See you soon, my friends.